Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a story that has stunned millions, not only in Iran but across the world. A story of water disappearing overnight, entire regions waking up to empty taps, and a nation realizing that a long, ignored crisis has finally crossed its red line. What happened in Iran did not just unfold in one night. It was the result of years of mismanagement, climate stress, political choices, and a fragile water system pushed beyond its limits. And now, as Iran wakes up without water, the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. The sudden disappearance of water was not literally instant, but for the people living in affected regions, it felt like it happened in a blink. One night they slept believing the system was strained but stable, and the next morning they discovered dry faucets, empty reservoirs, and emergency warnings. The government issued statements about technical failures and climate conditions, but the public reaction showed that confidence had already eroded. For many citizens, this crisis wasn't only about water. It symbolized something deeper, a breaking point after years of frustration. Iran has always been a nation shaped by its geography. Much of the country is arid, rainfall varies sharply between regions, and water has historically been a gift carefully managed. But in recent decades, rapid population growth, agricultural expansion, industrial pressure, and political decisions altered the delicate balance. Underground aquifers were pumped faster than they could recover. Rivers were diverted or dried up. Dams became symbols of national strength, yet many were built without long-term planning. All of this weakened the water system until the crisis finally erupted. When people woke up to empty taps, the shock was immediate. Families rushed to fill containers, hoping water trucks would arrive in time. Videos began circulating, showing long lines forming under the scorching morning sun. Social media spread images of frustrated residents demanding answers. In some areas, tensions escalated as people questioned why there had been no warning. The fear was not simply about thirst, but about what this collapse meant for hospitals, schools, farms, and the daily rhythm of life. The government quickly launched emergency responses, sending water tankers and dispatching engineers to assess the situation. Officials claimed the shortages were temporary and related to climate patterns or sudden pipe failures. But behind these statements, a more complex truth was unfolding. Years of declining rainfall and rising temperatures had made the country extremely vulnerable. The water infrastructure, especially in rural regions, could no longer support demand, and the public knew that temporary fixes would not heal a system that had been overexploited for decades. One of the biggest contributors to the crisis has been groundwater depletion. As surface water sources dried up, the country turned increasingly to wells, many of them illegal or unregulated. Farmers depended on these wells to sustain crops and livelihoods, while cities relied on them to support growing populations. Over time, water tables sank deeper and deeper, leaving entire provinces dependent on sources that could no longer recover. When the wells began to run dry, the collapse felt sudden, even though it had been building for years. Another challenge was the extensive network of dams constructed to manage water for agriculture, electricity, and urban supply. Initially, these dams were seen as engineering triumphs that could bring modern stability to an ancient land, but as rivers changed course, sediment built up, and rainfall decreased, many of these dams became more of a burden than a benefit. Some reservoirs evaporated faster than they could be replenished, leaving behind cracked earth and abandoned facilities. The disappearance of water overnight was symbolic of this larger pattern, a structure collapsing beneath its own weight. The human impact of the crisis spread faster than officials expected. Hospitals worried about sanitation systems failing. Farmers faced the possibility of losing entire seasons of crops. Schools struggled to stay open without running water. Factories that relied on water for cooling or production were forced to slow operations. Each sector of society discovered its vulnerability in real time, and the ripple effects reached far beyond the initial regions affected. For ordinary households, the emotional toll was also significant. Water is more than a utility. It is part of daily life, health, and dignity. To wake up without it is to confront a basic fear that the systems designed to protect and support a community can fail without warning. Parents scrambled to secure enough water for their children. Elderly residents who depended on home medical devices felt the pressure of uncertainty. And throughout neighborhoods, conversations shifted from routine concerns to survival and resilience. Many experts had warned that such a crisis was inevitable. Environmental researchers, hydrologists, and local activists had raised alarms about overpumping, disappearing lakes, and rising temperatures. Reports from inside and outside the country showed the same trend. Iran's water resources were declining faster than solutions were being implemented. However, political and economic challenges slowed progress. Investments favored large projects rather than sustainable management. Decentralized monitoring systems were never fully developed, and strategic reforms were postponed in the face of more immediate political priorities. International observers also pointed out that Iran's water crisis mirrors broader patterns across the region. Many countries in the Middle East face similar pressures, but Iran's combination of climate vulnerability and population size makes its crisis particularly severe. As temperatures rise and droughts become more frequent, water becomes not only an environmental issue, but a national security concern. The sudden overnight disappearance of water highlighted how fragile the balance has become. One of the most striking aspects of this crisis is the reaction of the younger generation. Social media platforms filled with debates, criticism, and urgent calls for accountability. Many young Iranians expressed fear that their future would be defined by shortages, migration, and instability. At the same time, they also showed determination to push for reform. They demanded transparency in water management, investment in modern technologies, and a shift away from outdated systems that failed to protect their country's most essential resource. The story of Iran waking up without water also has a cultural dimension. For centuries, the Persian civilization has been known for its mastery of water management. From ancient qanats to carefully designed gardens, water has always been interwoven with identity. The idea that water could vanish overnight challenges this historical strength. It forces a reckoning with the present and a reconsideration of values, traditions, and modern decisions that led to this point. In rural areas, the sense of emergency was even stronger. Farmers watched as their fields dried up and their wells reached the bottom. Entire communities that relied on agriculture faced existential questions. Without water, how do they survive? How do they support families that have lived in the same regions for generations? Many rural residents saw the crisis not just as a failure of natural systems, but as a failure of leadership, planning, and national priorities. As water scarcity intensified, discussions turned to long-term solutions. Some experts recommended modernizing irrigation systems to reduce waste. Others emphasized recycling wastewater or adopting desalination technologies. But each solution comes with challenges. Desalination is expensive and energy intensive, Recycling requires infrastructure that currently does not exist on a large scale. And agricultural reform would require political decisions that could disrupt entire economic sectors. Still, the crisis shows that doing nothing is no longer an option. Iran has reached a moment where change is not a choice but a necessity. The red line has been crossed, and the consequences of inaction are already visible. What the nation decides now will shape the next decades, affecting everything from food security to migration patterns to regional stability. International cooperation could also play a role. Water technology, conservation strategies, and sustainable development programs could help Iran recover. But political tensions complicate collaboration. For meaningful progress, the crisis must be addressed not only as an environmental issue, but as a diplomatic and economic challenge requiring new approaches. For the families living in affected cities, the crisis also brought moments of unity. Neighbors shared water. Communities organized distribution efforts for vulnerable residents. Volunteers helped transport supplies to remote areas. These acts of solidarity demonstrated resilience in the face of hardship. When systems fail, people often step forward to support one another, and the water crisis revealed the strength of community bonds even in difficult times. But solidarity alone cannot fix structural problems. As the days passed, frustration grew. People questioned how a country with centuries of hydraulic expertise could reach a point where entire regions ran dry. They questioned why officials ignored warnings. They questioned whether future crises might be even worse. These questions reflect a deeper concern that without systemic change, the disappearance of water could become a recurring nightmare rather than a one-time shock. Some analysts pointed out that Iran's climate is shifting faster than anticipated. Higher temperatures accelerate evaporation. Reduced snowpack affects seasonal water flows. Longer droughts strain reservoirs. When these factors combine with human mismanagement, the result is a crisis that feels sudden, but is actually years in the making. This pattern is now visible worldwide, but in Iran it has reached an especially dangerous stage. Looking ahead, the path to recovery will be complex. It will require new infrastructure, new policies, and new attitudes. It will require transparency and public trust, which cannot be rebuilt overnight. It will require collaboration not only within the government, but across communities, industries, and international partnerships. And most importantly, it will require recognizing that water is not infinite, not optional, and not something that can be taken for granted. As the crisis unfolds, one message becomes clear. Iran is standing at a crossroads. The disappearance of water overnight was not just a warning, but a turning point. Whether the nation moves toward sustainable recovery or deeper instability will depend on decisions made now. The public is demanding action. Experts are offering solutions, and the world is watching to see whether Iran can transform this moment of crisis into a moment of change. Yet, despite the uncertainty, there is still hope. Many countries have faced water crises and recovered through innovation, conservation, and community engagement. Technologies exist to restore balance, policies can be reformed, and people, when united behind a common purpose, can achieve remarkable results. Iran has the knowledge, the history, and the resilience to rebuild, but the effort must begin immediately. The story of Iran waking up without water is not only about disaster, it is also about awareness, awakening, and the possibility of transformation. It reminds everyone that essential resources must be protected, and that ignoring a crisis does not make it disappear. It shows that nations must adapt to a changing climate and evolving challenges, and it highlights the need for responsibility, vision, and collective action. As we reflect on this moment, the most important lesson is clear. Water is life, and without it, no nation can thrive. Iran has reached the edge of its limits. Now it must decide how to step back from the brink and rebuild a sustainable future. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that reveal the hidden forces shaping our world.